June Carney passed away in November 2023 at the Brookdale Assisted Living Facility in Charlotte, North Carolina. She had moved there in 2020 to be near her youngest son Brian and his wife Debbie. Prior to her move, she had enjoyed retired life in Charleston, South Carolina for 40 years, most of that time with her husband Steve, who passed away in 2012 at the age of 90. Born in Maplewood, New Jersey, June was one of 3 daughters born to Joseph and Matilda Kemp. Joseph was the owner of a cleaning supply manufacturing company, and Matilda was a stay-at-home mom. Life in Maplewood was idyllic for June and her siblings. She had many fond memories of growing up in a home surrounded by green space and nature. Her father enjoyed gardening and instilled in her early a joy for botany and design in the natural world. June attended Middlebury College, where she majored in Spanish studies and graduated as World War II was ending. Shortly after graduation, she booked a job with the Institute of International Education, a global nonprofit organization founded in 1919 that works with the State Department to develop programs that promote language learning to enable better communications between the United States and other nations. The IIE's office location in Washington Square near Greenwich Village in New York City provided June with ample opportunities to explore all that the city had to offer. She took full advantage of those opportunities, often hopping onto the Fifth Avenue open-air double-decker bus to concerts, movies, the theater, and on dates. After 2 years working at the IIE, June took a 3-week vacation to Mexico. In a letter to her grandson Mason in 2017, she wrote, "Mexico City was my first venture outside the U.S. I stayed with a widow who took 1 or 2 visitors in her apartment and showed them around the city and countryside, which was completely unspoiled and tourist-free. It was an ideal introduction to foreign travel, and a chance to exercise the Spanish I had worked so hard on in college. Then up popped the opportunity to go to France. The State Department sponsored a couple of trips to Europe, especially for students. The IIE was asked to recommend someone to help supervise the students during the voyage, and when asked, I jumped at the chance. I may not have been the most prudent choice of chaperone, but for me it was great. I organized a shipboard newspaper and had a week in Paris waiting for the return trip. It was less than 4 years after the Second World War ended, and the French were still struggling with upheavals and shortages. But Paris was still Paris. Back at work, I handled applications from 4 countries: Panama, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia. Your grandpa was my correspondent in Quito, working for the State Department. I decided it would be a good idea to get some first-hand knowledge of the people and countries I was working with, so arranged a work and vacation trip to hit all 4, and that's how I met Steve. Imagine June, a young, lively 20-something woman in post-war 1940s America, living and working in New York City and setting off for parts unknown to explore and see the world. She lived an independent and adventurous youthful life before she met her husband, after which they would launch into yet another series of adventures together. From the moment June and Steve met on that trip to Quito, Ecuador, they were on the move. They married in 1949, and with their growing family and Steve working as a foreign service officer, they traveled to and lived in faraway places such as Martinique, Lyon, France, Madrid, Valencia, and Barcelona, Spain, Cochabamba, Bolivia, Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic, and then McLean, Virginia. June dedicated herself to supporting Steve's diplomatic career, to raising their 5 children, to facilitating their many moves to several countries. All the while, June remained an educator. She at times tutored and taught in the classroom while living in Bolivia. After the kids were grown and gone, Steve and June went looking for a new place to settle down and retire, and found Seabrook on Johns Island in South Carolina. Their shared love of architecture and of all the arts, sculpture, music, literature, painting, botany, Japanese maples, frogs, and more, shaped their lives there. She was a frequent visitor to the Gibbs Museum and other art galleries in Charleston, as well as a volunteer at the Medical University Arboretum in Charleston, where she helped with plant identification with her friend Esther Pibnick. Those years in Charleston County were largely shaped by volunteer explorations, culture, and education. She returned to tutoring children, and she worked, again with her friend Esther, to develop the Seabrook Island Natural History Group, and one of the first nature trails on the island. Steve and June lived for 20 years in a home on Andell Way they had designed and built. Everywhere Steve and June lived, they met and befriended local artists and acquired an impressive collection of their works. Seabrook offered the ideal place to showcase the art and artifacts of their travels. Glass from Mallorca, tiles from Spain, paintings, drawings, sketches, sculptures, and watercolors from around the world. Steve and June remained just outside Seabrook at Bohicket Creek for 10 years until they relocated to Mount Pleasant in 2008. While living at Frankie, 4 years with Steve and 7 years after he passed away, June made many friends. She took art classes at Frankie where she met Jenny and Chris. Jenny was the art teacher that inspired June to start painting, and Chris, her husband, was a home health aide. June became very close with them both. They were so important and loving to her in her later years. June valued art her whole life and became an accomplished acrylic and watercolor artist in her own right. June leaves behind a family of 5 children and their loving spouses, 9 grandchildren, and 5 great-grandchildren. June Carney, whose life was marked by love of and dedication to family, love of life, travel, education, adventure, language, art, music, literature, food, culture, and the natural world, died November 11, 2023. She was 100 years old.